Good morning, everyone. My name is Antonia Soares Thompson. I'm the Director of Racial Justice Initiatives here with Middlesex District Attorney's Office. I am standing in temporarily for DA Ryan as she wraps up another meeting that she's in. And again, we're very excited to have this conversation today. So at some point, she will take over for me, and I appreciate you taking the time to just wait in the waiting room for a couple of minutes. So today's meeting is going to focus on a positive trend that we are seeing in our office. More people being empowered to stand up against incidents of hate and bias. We know that engaged bystanders are critical to ensuring incidents are reported and that interventions are ensured. They are better equipped to notice incidences, recognize them as such, and interpret the situation. How we can empower others to stand against hate, whether it's witnessed in person or online, is important to increase bystander engagement, and it's helpful because law enforcement can only address hate crimes that we are aware of. Online harassment and hate crimes are pressing issues in today's digital age. It's essential that we be informed and equipped to prevent and combat these acts. Now, reporting ensures that incidents are on our radar, and it helps us to facilitate really prompt action, whether through law enforcement, wraparound services, or other resolutions. Over the summer months, we regularly receive incident reports of hate and bias across the county. These reports can range from unpleasant interactions between parties at businesses, graffiti on school campuses and in public places, to verbal confrontations that happen between individuals. There were also reports that we received on online harassment that targeted students, including several reports on racial slurs that were found on high school running tracks and some other public places throughout our cities and towns. We received these incident reports through our reporting form on our website. We're happy that this tool has been useful and are working to expand its awareness on this form and increase accessibility in hopes that it will be utilized even more from those in our communities. We recognize, and I think this task force has talked about, the challenges that victims face that discourages them from reporting. Perhaps it's shock, embarrassment, retaliation, or fear of not being heard. For these reasons, bystanders, witnesses that come forward to report these interactions are critical to supporting not only the victims, but building a community culture that condones these type of behaviors. Bringing hate crimes to light and prosecuting offenders serves as a deterrent for future perpetrators, and also for our communities to reinforce what our community norms are, what we tolerate and what we won't tolerate. Recognizing that it's uncomfortable at times to intervene during these hateful interactions, it's perhaps even more uncomfortable not to do anything at all. So we hope that these resources you're going to learn today about bystander trainings in a wide variety of situations that you will then share with your agencies in your communities will be extremely helpful. We hope today that we can learn how to be better allies, stand up against targeted hateful conduct, including being more informed about the power of social media and the lack of security protocols of severely wide used platforms is also very not only informative, but it's ways that we can educate our community and perhaps alleviate some of these disbeliefs that you're going to learn, that those platforms are really securely monitored, and a watchful eye is put on all those behaviors through things that are posted and videos that are posted on social media, because as we'll learn, that is not necessarily true. Do most of understand what constitutes online harassment? Do you know the various forms that it possibly can take, including trolling, doxing, and cyberstalking? Obviously, we all know and understand that if it's left unchecked, online harassment and hate speech can normalize discrimination, racism, and other really harmful ideologies. So we hope today that you'll be able to think about various ways that you can take this work here at the task force and bring more to our community partners. So today we have two wonderful guest speakers. Susanna Burgelt is the partnership manager. Susanna grew up in California, but now calls Michigan her home. She's a social justice advocate and has worked in community building projects, violence prevention education and advocacy for survivors of domestic violence and elder abuse. In her spare time, she teaches self-defense and jiu-jitsu and goes on bike rides regularly with her daughter. So we're really excited to have Susanna here from the organization of right2be.org and talk about online services that they provide to empower bystanders and others in the community to stand up against harassment and hate. We also have today with us a longtime partner with the ADL. We have Daniel Kelly. He's a director of strategy and operations of the ADL League, the Anti-Defamation League, Center for Technology and Society. CTS works through research and advocacy to fight for justice and fair treatment in all digital social spaces, from social media to online games and beyond. Daniel helped lead the Stop Hate for Profit campaign for ADL in 2020, which raised the voices of over 1,000 leading companies and countless celebrities against Facebook interaction regarding hate on its platform, and led to meaningful change, including Facebook's agreeing to an external audit by the ad industry and hiring an internal VP of civil rights. Daniel leads the center's work to fight hate and harassment in the games. For the last 3 years, Daniel is the lead author of the first nationally responsive survey of hate, harassment, and positive social experiences in online games, which will be repeated again, that report again this year. He also manages the center's game research and conducts advocacy with game industry, civil society, government, and the broader public to push all of society responses to ensure that online games become respectful and inclusive spaces for all people. He's the member of the advisory board of Raising Good Gamers and an advisor to the Fair Play Alliance. So we're very excited to have both of our guest speakers today to really talk about, one, what we can do to empower ourselves to become better allies and bystanders to those that are harassed, either online, in person, and then also for us to understand a little bit more of how social media plays a critical role in spreading hate and harassment in a space where it is not all the time regulated, overseen, or others have that exposure to seeing. Because a lot of times we're on our own devices, our children are in their rooms and other spaces, but that doesn't prevent the spread of hate or harassment, which happens all the time. So I'm really happy to hear from our speakers. If there are any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat. There also will be time after presentations for us to have a little bit more engagement and ask questions, but feel free at any time to drop a question within the chat. So we're going to share our screen and we're going to talk it over. We're going to send it over to Susanna.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can you all see that okay? Perfect. Yeah, so I'm with Right2Be, and what we're going to talk about today specifically is what I like to call everyday workplace intervention, which really is probably our most popular work that we do, but all of our bystander intervention training kind of folds into this as well. And we really do think that this is a foundation for harassment prevention. So as you said, my name is Susanna Borgelt. I've been with Right2Be for about 1.5 years. And as the partnerships manager, I get the privilege of speaking with companies and organizations all over the world about their specific needs, and then try to create a more equitable and inclusive workplace for them and team up with them and how to do that. Our organization, the mission is to empower everyone to build a world that is free of harassment and filled with humanity. And what our work does is focus on turning the care that we have for each other into simple, creative, and effective action. And we really strive to accomplish this mission through training, partnering, community organizing. Today, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the training aspect of that and the partnering aspect of that. And so I want to review today kind of how we came to create bystander intervention training, especially the workplace variation of it, talk about the current landscape that's going on and the demand that we have, and also share what private and public offerings that we do have. So about 18 years ago, we recognized the problem of gender-based street harassment, catcalls, that kind of thing, and really wanted to have a solution. At that time, we started out being called Hollaback, so you may have heard of us as Hollaback, and realized we started collecting stories of gender-based street harassment and realized the need for bystander intervention education. And that really inspired us to create a methodology around that called the 5Ds. And so very quickly, I'll tell you what the 5Ds are. The 5Ds are 5 different ways that you can intervene when you see a hurtful moment happening. You could distract by, dropping something or asking an unrelated question and getting a person out of a harmful situation. You could delegate. We all know what that means, get another person involved. Usually we think about an authority figure, but it could be someone else. We could document by taking a video of the thing, but then we think about workplace, we might document by taking screenshots or writing down the event. We can delay our intervention by asking the person who experienced harm after the fact how they're doing, like, are they okay? And then, of course, the 5th G is direct intervention, which is often what we think about first, but we like to kind of get in the weeds about when is it right to do direct intervention and maybe when is it not a good time to do direct intervention, because it's not always the most helpful of the interventions. So these are all things we did by creating the 5Ds methodology. And then as we grew and recognized the application, we realized we needed to change our name because we weren't just about gender-based harassment anymore. We realized that bystander intervention is a methodology for many audiences and identities. So we changed our name to Right to Be because we do believe that everyone has the right to be who they are, wherever they are. And so we partnered with other organizations doing movement work to stem the tide of race-based and identity-based hate. We created a multitude of different trainings to educate others on how to intervene when they see anti-Asian hate, stigma around learning differences, ableism, police-sponsored violence, and the list goes on. In 2017, we wanted to reach a broader audience, so that's when we adapted the curriculum to make it something that is usable in the workplace. And at first, there really wasn't much interest. Workplaces in 2017 didn't really see the need for this, but we really put in the work to make a really high-quality training. And then there were a couple of key movement moments that had workplaces waking up to the need for this kind of training. So let's see if you guys remember these moments. You can drop them in the chat if you like. First one was March 2020. What happened then? Let's see, I don't even have my chat up. Let me pull it up. We all know what happened. It was the pandemic. Yes, thank you, someone. COVID, yeah. So when COVID happened, things shut down. People were working from home. They had time to focus on other things. And so we started to see a trickle of a need for like, okay, yeah, actually, we do need to have this training. This is interesting to us. But then what happened in May 25 of 2020? Anyone remember that date? These get progressively harder. So we were still shut down, but that was the day that George Floyd was murdered. And that's when people really recognized, oh, there is a significant problem in our country with hate, and we need some training on that. And so workplaces really started to feel the need to educate their employees. And then the event on March 16, 2021. And this one isn't as like George Floyd was huge and everybody remembers that. I'm not sure everyone remembers this one, but for us, it really was a tipping point. March 16 was when the murders in Atlanta happened against the, Asian hate, right? There were multiple Asian women who were killed in Atlanta. And that's when people really recognize like, oh my goodness, we have to get this training. Like this is something that's happening a lot now. And so people just, the demand was huge, really. And we had done some partnering with an organization, AAJC, to do a bystander intervention to prevent anti-Asian and xenophobic harassment. We had done, preventing police-sponsored violence, and like that work we had all done before these events happened. And so we recognized the need. And then when other people recognized it, that's when the floodgates came in and they said, okay, yeah. And what's important to recognize is that our most important and effective work was done before that demand hit. We'd already developed the workplace training and that partnered with AAJC. And so we really were ready when other people recognized and were inspired by tragic events, unfortunately, to fill that need. So this is how things are going now. The current demand after that huge, people really recognizing this need. We saw that like in the last 2 years, more than 1,600 inquiries we've had for training. And you can see that most of them are nonprofit organizations, which really isn't surprising when you remember that nonprofit also includes government entities and educational institutions. So just a small sampling of some of our clients that we've gotten to work with. The State Department is someone we work with all over the World Health Organization, the Italian Rail Organization Company, and the United Nations, as well as many other international organizations, Penn State, NYU, as well as many other universities, the County of Los Angeles, City of Portland, many other local governments, state governments that we've worked with, Pinterest, Lenovo, Macmillan, as well as many other companies. So we've really had the privilege to talk with a lot of different fascinating, wonderful, motivated people all over the world and have this meeting of the minds with these professionals to help them create safer and more equitable workplaces for their employees. And when I talk to companies and organizations all over the world, there's certain themes that come out as far as what their needs are. And I'd love to hear from you what you think those, what do people think that they need? Like, what are the needs that people come to me with? Have any guesses? Or you can even state your own needs, and we'll see if they fit into the themes. Acceptance, diversity, absolutely. Yes, you'll see that. People are like, how do we make our places more inclusive, right? That's a question that people come to me with. What else? Safety, how do we make our places safe? Yeah, I love that. That does not come up on this list, but that is a true visceral need. And you'll see that when people talk about the trainings after they've experienced it. Accessibility, belonging, right? Absolutely. So some of the things I hear, we had an incident and we need help. That happens. I have that conversation with people. We have a lot of DEI training, but we still don't know what to do. I hear that. There are power dynamics here that are unhealthy. Prevention, someone said in the chat, absolutely. How do we prevent this from happening in the future? Wonderful. We want to eliminate bias in our hiring is a theme that I hear. So that's something we help people with. After last year's scandal, we need to make our name better. That happens. Our clients get really aggressive with our employees. How do we equip them? So that's a huge theme that we have actually, is people coming us when they're working with clients or patrons, or they have some kind of public facing facility. And how do you equip your employees to make sure that they're safe when the client, the patron, the person coming in is the one that's actually doing a lot of harm? And then we're expanding our team, becoming more diverse. We want everyone to be inclusive. So I love that that was a theme in the chat, because yes, that's absolutely something that people come to us. Love it to have those conversations when people are doing that on the front end. So out of all of these, which one would you guess is the most common? Any guesses? I'll give it away. It's all right. You don't have to guess. This is it. We have a lot of DEI training, but we still don't know what to do. And that is something that we hear over and over again, because what people really want is something actionable. We have a lot of theoretical stuff. We've got a lot of books out there, which are great. But what we found is that awareness is not enough. They're aware that the problem exists. And us as part of a movement, the movement is doing a really good job of teaching about racism, sexism, patriarchy, ableism, and on and on. And people are ready to act in addition to learning. And that's what they're currently longing for. And so something that we've heard a lot about, and this is just a graph I pulled off, but anything where you're talking about education of instances of hate, of harassment, of discrimination, when we start educating, the graph goes up. And that's not because the instances are going up. It's that people, once we start educating, the people who actually say something that goes up faster. And that's not a bad thing. That just means we're starting to actually have a good grip of what the problem really is. But of course, once we see the graph go up, and we see all these instances of hate and people are actually reporting, we want to know how to turn the graph back down. We actually want to equip people with actionable skills to change that. And so here are some conversations that I've had with people. We're not having problems with egregious harassment. It's more like little things like guys saying, oh, don't be a P, man up. Or, people here don't believe that discrimination is happening when they are the ones perpetuating it. Last month, I had to confront someone who didn't give keys to a person who needed the keys. There was absolutely no reason that I could see that he wouldn't give him the keys except that he was Black. When I asked him directly about it, he said, I don't know, I just don't trust the guy for some reason. And that's the kind of stuff we have to address here. Or, we're in the final stages of hiring an individual who uses they, them pronouns, and we want to make sure they feel welcome here. So we want some training for our staff. So these are the kinds of conversations that I'm having with people. And I want to give you a glimpse of the tools that we use when we actually do training. So when we approach teams like this, we use this tool called the spectrum of disrespect. And this is really a key part of our education, recognizing that in the spectrum of disrespect, we talk about on the far right side, there are instances of harassment and discrimination that are quite egregious, hostile notes and emails, verbal abuse, inappropriate comments, sexual innuendos, requesting sexual favors. You're going to lose your job over this kind of stuff. But before those instances happen, there are lesser forms of disrespect that are absolutely part of this same spectrum. And when we tolerate things on the left side, like speaking over people or intentionally undermining someone with gossip, failing to greet or acknowledge someone when they come in, when we tolerate that kind of behavior, then it emboldens people to go farther. And so that is the kind of behavior we want to address front end before it gets to a point where it's something that we have to go to HR, we have to go to the police about. And you'll recognize that, even though like we started out gender-based, this list is not specifically about any kind of harassment, because something that's really key for our organization is that we are unapologetically intersectional. And we do have multiple workshops that focus on specific identities, but those are never our most popular. And I was once told that if you try to teach people too many skills to face too many kinds of discrimination, it becomes too much and people can't, and it's ineffective. But I haven't seen that to be true as we do this work. We've actually seen the opposite. Our most effective workshop is our bystander intervention in the workplace workshop, which doesn't focus on any one identity, but really focuses on the intersectionality of identities and how they show up at work. And so this is one of our slides where we do talk about intersectionality, which is, what are your identities? How do they affect how you move through public spaces? And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. Some of it is racial, some of it's gender, some of it's ability, age, all of those things contribute to our identity. So this is how we talk about the 5 Ds. So like I said, we have distract. And distract, you can be so creative and do it in so many ways. It might be asking an unrelated question. It might be like breaking out in song or dropping everything that you have. And what that really does is create a helpful barrier between the person who's experiencing harm and the incidents that's happening. And then it takes attention away from the perpetrator. They tend to like attention. And so when you take that attention away, they tend to stop. When we talk about delegate, we really like to emphasize delegating across, not just up, because when we delegate across, we recognize that other people might be more effective than us. Maybe I see a woman who's uncomfortable. I might not feel safe in that space to approach that situation, but I could turn to my male colleague. And if we already know we're on the same page, we're allies, I can say, hey, do you see that woman? She feels uncomfortable. Can you go break up that situation? Or it might be the case that someone, needs to have a shared identity. And so I see someone who experienced a harmful moment, and I want to turn to someone who shares an identity with them to go check on them, because maybe I don't understand what just happened, but I see that they're not comfortable. And so we have to recognize that other people might be more helpful in situations than ourselves. Document, like I said, taking videos in public spaces, writing things down in the workplace, taking screenshots if it's online. There's lots of ways to document, but what we like to emphasize about document is that it's most effective when we're taking care of the person experiencing that harm. And so if we give it to the person and say, hey, I documented this in case you should choose to go to HR, go to the police, whatever you need to do, and putting the power back in their hands. I think delay is super underrated. It's probably my favorite because there are times that I freeze in the moment. That's a very normal human response, but that doesn't mean I can't do something. I can always go and check in on a person after a thing happened, which really goes a long way in stripping the loneliness away from that situation. They recognize they weren't alone in thinking that was a negative instance. And then, of course, direct intervention is often what we think of first, and most often the reason we don't do anything, because we recognize that there are inherent risks with directly intervening. We recognize it could escalate the situation. Retaliation is a real thing, especially if there are power dynamics involved. And so we have to take that into account when we consider what kind of intervention we're going to do. But direct intervention can also be done really well by setting clear boundaries, such as saying, you know what, that kind of comment doesn't belong here. Or by asking questions, by saying something like, hey, what did you mean by that? Or it seems like you have a reason for saying that, and letting the person self-reflect and kind of check themselves. So that can be really useful too. And so we do apply these 5Ds to many, many different kinds of workplaces. We work with lots of different industries. And what's really cool is that the 5Ds are very flexible to address a variety of different workplaces. And our training team does customization so that it can be very geared towards your particular staff, whether they're virtual, whether they're, working outside, whether client facing or not. And so we work through those scenarios with the training team for different industries. So I'll give you some examples. We've talked with a lot of different medical hospitals, and an example here is an attending gets on the case of a nurse for some, small instance and just kind of yells at them. And that's not very nice. And so what are some ways we could respond? We could check in on the nurse. We could directly say, you know what, that kind of attitude isn't helpful here in the workplace. We could document it and give it to the nurse and say, hey, we could go to HR together if you want some help. So that's an example from the medical field. In a virtual instance, we have a woman who suggests an idea at a meeting, gets passed over, and a man suggests a similar idea, and the boss says it's a great idea. What do you do in that situation? You might, distract and say, wait a minute, I have in my notes that this came up earlier. Did we discuss this already? You might delay, check in on Bianca and say, hey, you want me to step in here? You got this? You might directly intervene and say, I'm so glad you brought Bianca's idea up from earlier. Or are there other ideas? And we always leave space for talking about other ideas. And also we do a lot of university training. So we want to talk about, what that might look like on campus. This is an example of misgendering a person and using the wrong pronouns, and how do we deal with that situation. So there is a whole body of research dedicated to understanding what it takes to change behavior and get bystanders to actually intervene. And because of this research, we know the steps. So we know that individuals need to notice a thing that has happened and interpret it as negative. All right, I summed that up as number 1, which is recognize disrespect. We also know that number 2, they have to feel responsible to address it. If they don't feel like they're supposed to do anything, they're not going to do anything. And then number 3, they have to feel capable of addressing it. And what we've seen is that more and more people are getting better at number 1. As a culture, we're kind of growing in that. We have anti-racist vocabulary, and we talk about these things, which is really, really good. People are even starting to feel number 2 a little bit, I think, culturally overall, is that, okay, yeah, I'm supposed to do something. I'm supposed to be an upstander. I'm supposed to say something if I see something. But what we've seen is that people are still very thirsty for number 3. They don't know what to do in those instances. And that's where our bystander intervention training, I think, really helps and fills that gap. And so I want you to keep these steps in mind as we go through the next set of anecdotes and data. First, I'll share some testimonials from employees who have gone through our training from different companies all over the world. They've gone through this training, and then I'm going to share an outside study of our training and its effectiveness. So here, this one said, I really appreciated how I entered feeling powerless, and after the training, I feel I have power. I like when Heidi said, do you feel like there's at least one thing you could do when you see or feel someone is being disrespected? Yes. This training was incredibly helpful because not only did it give me real actionable strategies and tools, but also affirmed that you cannot always follow the direct path and need to consider your own safety. This made being an active bystander seem doable. I feel that I experience disrespect directly or passive aggressively every day. Most people are likely unaware they are doing it because the disrespectful action is normalized. This gives me strategies to address those behaviors when I encounter them. As someone who feels empowered to help others, but uncertain of the best methods to do so, this training offered a lot of actionable advice on how to intervene when witnessing harassment or disrespectful behavior. This training has given me a sense of permission to address issues that happen in the professional world, which I have been scared to address for fear of losing my job. This course provided some tactical tools for intervention to tackle the paralysis of not knowing what to do in an uncomfortable situation. And this person gave their name for us to share as well. As a straight white male, training such as these help me to understand my unconscious bias I may have and help me to be a better supervisor, coworker, and friend to the people around me who bring diversity to our agency. And lastly, I am not afraid to speak up anymore. And I love that one because I think if we can take away the fear for people, I think it's really beautiful. So we got a grant from Reliance to bring in Germain Impact Solutions to evaluate the effects of our bystander intervention in the workplace training. And so these were the results. So this was a long form study. I was looking at how long exactly it is, but a 9-month study that examined the impacts of this training. Ooh, great question. Someone asked about using them as community building. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Thank you for bringing that up. So did participants learn new information? Yes, they did. They learned about the spectrum of disrespect. They learned, were more aware of the impacts of harassment, understanding why it matters to actually intervene. And 88% still remembered the 5 Ds even after 6 months after the training, which was pretty cool. And 67% reported using bystander intervention skills they learned in the training. So 90% said they were more aware of the impacts of harassment, which is crucial to actually being an upstander. And people were better able to recognize the situation before it escalated. And we felt, do participants feel like they have the tools and techniques to safely respond to harassment? Do they feel capable of doing that? 87% of the respondents agreed or strongly agreed that the 5 Ds gave them the tools that they needed. So yes. And how have people used bystander intervention following the training? Well, we had the statistic that 32% had reported seeing a situation, and when they saw something, they did something. And one of our respondents actually had done something, I think it was 27 times. So it was really exciting to see that even after 6 months, this was very, very effective. It stuck with people, and people had actionable skills of what to do. And so what we saw is that it supported team building and camaraderie. And we have had trainings where people have used this as a community building thing. So whether it be for a specific community, a community center that says we want this for all of our people, come and join this, we're going to talk about it. It does build camaraderie. Supported boundary setting and awareness, and of course was most impactful when it was part of a larger initiative, which is always what we want to plug into, people who are already doing great work. Now, as legislators are seeing data like this, and not just from our bystander intervention training, but all over, what we're noticing is that there are more and more laws being rolled out requiring bystander intervention. And so that's what you see here is just a sampling of those. And then, so as we remember where we want to talk about the different offerings that we have. Yeah. So we do offer private and customized trainings, and we also do free public trainings. So we have a lot. We have how to respond to harassment when it's happening to you, preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, bystander intervention. Thank you for dropping that. Yeah, so they're all on our website. Resilience, mitigating implicit bias, conflict de-escalation. And we also we have an active shooter training now. We have bystander intervention for youth, digital safety. This is just a small sampling. I think our catalog is up to about 30 trainings now. So I would love to talk to you more. If you feel free, I'm going to drop my email in for everybody also. So you can reach out to me directly if you're interested in the full catalog, or if you'd like to set up a meeting and talk about this. Right. There you go. And then we also have free public training. So this is a resource I love to give to community partners and say, please put the word out. This is our calendar for September. So it's already the 14th. So I'm actually doing a demo on the bystander intervention in the workplace this afternoon. But we also have generative conflict coming up. And we also have bystander intervention to stop hate-based harassment in partnership with Houston Coalition Against Hate. So I'm going to open up for questions now.
Susanna, can you talk a little bit about how do you get that amount? It's a huge partnership that you have with all these different organizations, that what you just showed in that calendar. Can you talk a little bit about the developing of that partnership? So, because you're basically getting the best people to do these trainings.
Yeah, and what we have done is we've created an incredible methodology, and then when we talk to people who are experts in, preventing anti-Asian hate, for example, with the AJC, we want to create a training, and we often co-facilitate it and say, okay, like we want your expert knowledge paired with this methodology. How do we do this? And it's been years of building those partnerships. We continue to build partnerships. We still feel that there's gaps in the intersectionality that we want to fill. And so that's something that we're working on. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. Question here. Recordings of the trainings you had earlier in September, a few seem really interesting. Yeah. So our recordings, when we do public trainings, are only live on Facebook Live for 24 hours after the session, which is helpful for ones coming up. If you're like, oh, I can't make that exact time, but I do want to watch it. And they do repeat. So check back on our calendar monthly and look for those trainings coming up again. We do have, I think our October calendar is up, and so there's more trainings like that as well. Great question. Have you had effective training for Yes, we've had many, many different trainings for municipalities, and depending on their goals and depending on what departments we're working with. And sometimes we have community health organizations that open it up for, like, they want internal trainings for all their staff who are, client facing. They want external trainings for their community. And so, customizing it for those different audiences is something that we do. We've done trainings for, many, many staff. We do a lot of, and something we're excited about because there's a huge need, is public transportation. So we've worked a lot with Sound Transit in Seattle, because we do all their onboarding for their people there. We're doing a lot of with a lot of federal agencies as well. So working with national parks and the EPA and State Department, obviously. I hope that answers your question, Donna. Feel free to ask more if it doesn't.
Susanna, thank you. That was wonderful. That was good. That was really very practical in terms of the trainings that are out there and the components. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I've really appreciated this. I probably am not going to get to stay, even though I'm really excited about your next presentation, and I hope that goes really well. But I do have another meeting I have to get to.
Of course, thank you. And we'll turn it over to an old friend. I'm always happy when people come back. Daniel has been here before to help us. We're happy to see you again.
Yep, glad glad to see you all, and thanks for having me. I will pull up my presentation, which was not quite as elaborate and and epic as the last one, but hopefully you will find it useful and meaningful. Let me share my screen. Yeah. So this is really a presentation that's going to be about a specific project we're doing. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the Center for Technology and Society at ADL, some of the issues that we're working on, and then I'll go in depth in a project which focuses on the ways in which social media platforms, sort of a means by which social media platforms are a means by which we are evaluating how social media platforms are supporting targets of online hate and harassment. So just let's see here if it'll let me. So just starting a little bit for those who are unfamiliar, ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, is a nonprofit founded in 1913 with a mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. The Center for Technology and Society, which was founded in 2017, does that same mission, but in digital spaces. Specifically, our mission is to end the proliferation of anti-Semitism and all forms of hate and harassment online. And we do this in a number of different ways. And one of the ways in which we do that is by finding ways to, one of the questions we get a lot is who's doing well, right? When we talk about social media platforms, right? And I think the people are dissatisfied with the answer that nobody, right? And so I think what we do is we try to look at sort of slices of how social media platforms are functioning, and try to create rubrics around how they're functioning in different capacities. So we've done evaluations around how they address Holocaust denial or anti-Semitism broadly. For this one, we sort of drew some inspiration from our annual survey of online hate and harassment. So I'll show you some results from that just briefly. We have done for the last 5 years a survey of hate and harassment on social media to get some sort of numbers around the experience of targets. One of our sort of core pillars at the Center for Technology and Society is how do we give voice to the experience of targets of online hate and harassment? And one of the ways we do that is by sort of quantifying it through a variety of different surveys, whether that's of online multiplayer gamers or of social media users. And we saw this year sort of the highest number that we'd seen in the time we've done this survey around online hate and harassment by year. This is sort of the amount that they've ever experienced. This is how much people experience in the last 12 months, right? So these numbers are really concerning. And I think, what we, one of the takeaways from this is also the amount of folks being targeted by identity. I think over the last years, we've seen in conversations with tech companies, as well as, their statements to the press and others and to lawmakers, there have been a lot of conversation about, that the companies are stepping up, that they're doing something, that they're taking sort of steps to address the harms of online hate and harassment. And yet what we see is a continued increase of this among people who are existing online, especially people from vulnerable and marginalized communities. So what we did was we put together a list of sort of product features. So these are sort of aspects of social media platforms that we believe and others believe are the most important sort of features to have available in order to effectively support people who experience hate and harassment on social media. So this includes things like being able to block, being able to mute, being able to filter for certain kinds of terms, but it also includes things like telling people where they are in the process of reporting hate on their platform. Things that seem kind of elementary, but in many cases are just not present on social media platforms. And we didn't just make these features up out of thin air. What we did was we looked back at our research, and we looked back at the research of other organizations as well. So looking at PEN America, looking at UNESCO, looking at the World Wide Web Foundation, and looking across a variety of these features, and looking at the number of times these were recommended since 2019. And so I think when we come to the platforms, as part of rolling this out, we have meetings with all of the major platforms, and we say, it's one thing for us to be like, well, ADL says, you should do this, right? But it's another thing to say, we've said this for the last X number of years, and so have other organizations. And I will say that all of the research that this is based in comes from the experience of people who are targeted by online hate and harassment. So this is not just us sitting in our tower. This is us going out and talking to people who are experiencing online hate and harassment, saying, "Hey, what would you need to feel supported when you are having this experience on the platform? What would you need to manage your experience so that you could exist on this platform without feeling the weight of the kinds of hate and harassment that you're experiencing, as acutely?" And so these are things like batch reporting, right? Batch reporting is the thing that is most commonly recommended or suggested by targets when we talk to them. And it's really, like so elementary, right? Sometimes I get bored even talking about it, but it's just the idea that you would be able to report more than one comment at a time, right? Some of these things are so elementary, right? Just so that you don't have to go in when you are targeted by hate and report tweet by tweet or post by post every single time especially if you're a major public figure and you're experiencing mass harassment, or even a minor public figure who's experiencing mass harassment, right? These kinds of like important aspects of how social platforms function are have been recommended many times by targets, by organizations who speak to targets. And in many cases, there are only actually 3 platforms that currently have batch reporting of the 9 that we looked at. So I'll go over a little bit. So these are the grades that we gave to the different platforms, right, based on whether they had these features in place. And this is sort of our way to get around talking to the public, talking to lawmakers, talking to the companies about, who is, what does good look like? Who is doing the best? And so the highest grade that we gave was to the primarily video game streaming platform Twitch, which had a number of the sort of features that we asked in place. So they have, for instance, cross-platform reporting in place, which means if somebody is doing something horrible on another platform and sending people to Twitch to engage in online harassment of a user, you have the ability on Twitch to report that kind of, they have sort of a flow, which they're being very public about, that allows them to evaluate, hey, is this off-platform behavior such that we want to shut down people coming in from that location. They also have a shield mode where I think one of the things, you can have blocks in place, you can have mutes in place, you can have different kinds of filters in place, but often those things have to be done very, very manually. And so what something like a shield mode or a safety mode, as we call it in the report card, does is it allows people, if you're a streamer or a public figure who's going live to broadcast a speech or an event, maybe there's you're going to be under more scrutiny or more vulnerable to an attack than you would otherwise be on the platform. So something like a shield mode allows you to have certain presets in place that, I know I'm going to be vulnerable at this moment, so I can put the shield mode in place, and it will, put these different filters in place. Maybe it'll be less of a open space to communicate during this time, but like I need that because I know I'll be a target, right? So it's these kinds of really important features that we are evaluating, folks, and this is one that Twitch has. A feature that Twitch doesn't have, right, is a reporting portal. So they have a portal for appeals, right? If you're wrongly taken off the platform and you appeal a decision, they have a portal where you can see the status of your appeal. But for the average person reporting content, they don't actually have something that lets you check, hey, I reported this user or I reported this comment. Where is it in the process? How, why have they taken an action or not taken action? That doesn't exist. So that's one of the things in conversation with them that we talked about. In the middle of things, we have TikTok here, right? TikTok is one of the 3 platforms that does have batch reporting. They allow for 20 or more comments. Actually, no, I think they've increased it. It's around 100 or more comments at a time to be reported. They have the reporting portal we talked about. They don't have what we call delegate access, which means that you can delegate. Let's say you are, somebody who's being deluged with hate. Ostensibly, we believe, and people have expressed that the ability to have somebody trusted without necessarily giving them your username and password, being able to have a trusted ally and give them access to your account and give them access to the ability to review comments allows you to take a step away from from the hate you're experiencing, and allowing, you know, a trusted ally, a friend, to go through and help, you know, address the hate and harms you're experiencing. So if TikTok doesn't have that, it's one of the things we recommended to them. And then at the bottom end, Snapchat really doesn't have, you know, has sort of blocking and muting in place, but doesn't have any of the other sort of major and important features in place. They don't have batch reporting. They don't have a reporting portal. They don't have any filtering that you can do. And so we you know, we had a tense conversation with them about all of these kinds of things. And one of the things that no platform has, and I think it was interesting in conversation, no platform pushed back on us and said, actually, we do have this. They don't have this. Regardless of the level of severity of harassment or hate you're experiencing on a platform, no platform has the ability to reach a live human being to support them. Right. And so when we're talking about this, we're not recommending necessarily that everybody be able to reach a live human being, but we are saying if you're experiencing stalking, if you're experiencing sexual harassment, if you're experiencing doxing or swatting, you should be able to get some sort of personalized support from a platform in a way that that, you know, allows you to express the severity of the experience that you're having, and get some real personalized support. And I think that's one of the things, you know, we did have some fruitful conversations about what this could look like, but no platform was like, oh yes, of course we do that. They don't do this, right? And I think this is a huge fail in terms of supporting targets. So that's a little bit. So we take these report cards, we bring them out to the public, we bring them to companies, we bring them to lawmakers, and we try to use this as a means to continue the conversation around what it means to support targets of online hate and harassment, and what good looks like when we're talking to social media companies. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to send a link to the full report for folks who are interested, and happy to answer any questions folks have.
Thank you, Daniel. Questions? People want to either call out a question or put it in the chat?
You know, I had a quick question, because I think, you know, Snapchat is the worst when we think about kids and young adults who are targeted at many a times between bullying, harassment, and hate. When you have these conversations with these platforms, is there any sense of, I don't know if the word's remorse, but just a responsibility that they should have more safety things intact? I mean, when you talk about the delegate access, I mean, that would be huge for either parents, you know, a
Right.
school administrator, a social worker, someone to be able to have that. And I don't know if those in the audience like know that exists, that you could possibly do that. So is there any sense from them that the importance, or do they recognize how detrimental this harassment is on individuals on their platforms?
So I think it depends on the platform. It's a good question. I think it depends on the platform. Some platforms are very defensive, right? Some platforms are like, we don't have these things, but we have other things, right? And I think what we try to, and I think they're used to coming from the place of, we're the platform, we have all this data on the user experience, we have, you know, expertise in product design, but they're not used to having somebody come to them at the executive level from the perspective of people who are experiencing people who are being targeted on the platform, right? I think in general, they see users as sort of numbers. And I think the thing that we've heard again and again about user reports specifically is like, oh, it's a noisy signal. Like there are a lot of people who report in bad faith or other things, right? And so I think, you know, there were a couple platforms where we actually did have good conversations where they were like, you know, either saying, you know, hey, we recognize this as a problem. This particular feature is on our roadmap. It'll be launched this time next year, right? And we wrote that down, and we'll follow up with them to hold them accountable to that commitment, right? And sometimes they said things like, you know, with the live support for people, right? They were like, well, what would that look like, right? There are models like in the suicide prevention space. There have been attempts by Meta/Facebook and others to do work when they detect people talking about self-harm, you know, directing those users to counselors who, you know, are you know, part of a suicide hotline or something. So there are models in other forms of content of sort of direct human support, but it's just not in the realm of sort of hate and harassment, unfortunately. So I think those are the conversations we want to have. We want to have be like, hey, how do we actually do this? Right? We're not necessarily saying from the perspective of targets, right? We know the best way to do it, but we are saying this is something that people are asking for, and like you have a responsibility to figure this problem out.
Anybody else? Questions?
I just ask a quick follow-up. Do you feel that this report going forward will have a good impact on legislators? Do you see that the legislation is the more information that they get about this will, I don't know, put some requirements and put some regulation on this, on these type of safeguards?
It's a good question. I think it's sorry, someone else had a comment. Or is that anyway? So I think it's a good question. I think it's part of the purpose of this with legislators is really to try to move the conversation, to add into the conversation more of a product focus than just a, thumbs up, thumbs down on different kinds of content, because especially in a US context when we have such strong speech protections, I think the way to go about regulating companies is at the level of thinking about products and thinking about centering targets. And so I think we're trying to use this as a way to urge legislators just to think in this regard as well.
Daniel, thank you once again. That was really interesting, and again, very practical in terms of what's out there. Thank you so much.
Sure. Glad. Thanks so much for having me.
I just want to, before we leave, just spend 1 second talking about something else, which is that, on August 26th marked the 60th anniversary of the original March for Jobs and Freedom on Washington. And it was on the 28th that Reverend Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And that event, the 60th anniversary, was sponsored by a number of organizations, including the ADL, the Urban League. And it was not intended just to be a commemoration, but also a landmark moment really in continuing that fight. And sadly, on the same day, we saw a gunman kill 3 Black people in a racially motivated attack at a dollar store in Jacksonville, Florida. That gunman, identified as Ryan Christopher Palmita, bought a handgun in April of this year, an AR-15 style rifle in June, lived with his parents, had no criminal record, although he had been detained previously under what they call in Florida the Baker's Act, similar to the commitments we can do here for 72 hours when somebody is believed to be a danger to themselves or others. The Justice Department is investigating that Florida incident as a hate crime and considering it to be racially motivated extremism because he used racial slurs during the incident, left behind a screed that was just filled with racist language, and drew swastikas on the firearm. And one of the things I think if people have been paying attention that is truly terrifying, and I think is happening so much that we've really become immune to it, is if you look every morning, if you read the Boston Globe on page 2, whether you read it in the hard copy or in person, online, they will put a little box that talks about what mass shootings have happened in the last 24 hours or so. And that mass shooting is actually relatively small. It only has to be something in which 1 to 4 people, not including the shooter, have died. And in a truly terrifying thing, this year, since January 1 of 2023, we have had 477 mass shootings in the United States. That's almost 2 a day. And yet we don't see a whole lot of talk about that. We don't see a lot of outrage about that. And as many of you know, here in Massachusetts, we're having difficulty getting through the legislature, even a very common sense gun bill. So I think that's something we need to be reflecting about. Not all of these are hate or racially motivated, but a lot of them are. And in any event, many of them happen in places where there are kids, there are guns being brought into schools, as you may have seen very publicly. We had a child in the school yesterday in Lowell with a loaded handgun. Guns just can't be in school. And we, even after everything that's happened here, we seem unable to kind of draw that line. So I just sort of suggest that to people as something to think about in terms of, you get the kind of government that you tolerate. And we are tolerating this. And people are in jeopardy every single day. And much the same way that we have in some places tolerated this kind of hate incident. We are investigating an incident you may have seen that happened in Everett. Candidate for city council had a defaced mannequin head put near her campaign sign. She is a Haitian American candidate. We've met with her. We're continuing that investigation. One of the things that is most compelling, I think, about that, and the video has been out there, is people did that in broad daylight on a pretty busy street. And, this is not something that happened in the dark of night when people kind of snuck out to do that. They felt okay about doing that. And so I think we had a lot of discussion today really about how to be good bystanders and how to think about some of the things that are happening online, which are truly awful. And I hope that people take advantage of that, maybe bring folks in to do trainings in your organizations, or also think about how can I be a better citizen and a better bystander. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Antonia, for getting us organized this morning. I appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you.